Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the PartSource Executive Webinar. Today's presentation, Optimizing Inventory in Clinical Engineering, will be presented by Boyd Hutchins. Before we begin, please note, you have a control panel on your screen. You can minimize and expand this panel by hovering on the control bar. You can submit questions using the question portion, which is located near the bottom of your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. If your question was not answered, we will respond to you individually after the event. All registrants will receive a copy of the presentation and a link to the recording after the webinar. The information will be sent to the email in which you registered for this webinar. And now I would like to introduce today's presenter, Boyd Hutchins. Boyd Hutchins is the Director of Healthcare Technology Management at Arkansas Children's Hospital, where he and his team are responsible for his network's more than 15,000 medical devices, including imaging, and complete over 14,000 work requests per year, which include on average 365 special projects and 9,500 repairs. Saving babies is more than just a department credo. It is his HTM team's overarching goal. Boyd has been with Arkansas Children since 2014, and prior to that, he was with Aramark Healthcare. So with that, Boyd, I would like to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to PartSource for inviting me to tell our story about our journey with them. But before I begin, I want to make you guys a promise. I can't really talk about what we do here without mentioning a certain popular methodology that became popular in healthcare back in 2007. So I want to promise you that I will only use the word lean once or twice during this presentation. And if you rolled your eyes when you heard that word, I forgive you. I get that reaction a lot. Oh no, here comes that guy again. But I will have to reference three basic components of that methodology that plays into how we run our operation here at Arkansas Children's Hospital, and that's the elimination of waste, single piece flow, and the standardization of our work. So the picture on your left, you may recognize this, it's the room. And just about every clinical engineering department I've ever been in over 30 years has had one of these rooms. Spare parts, equipment awaiting maintenance or awaiting parts, supplies, test equipment are all crammed into this room. There's the endless cycle of purging it, cleaning it, and organizing it, only to have it get back to where it was before you even started. We began eliminating waste, standardizing our work, and moving to a single piece flow concept back in 2007. We applied those principles to several of our workflows in HTM, so equipment repairs, our preventive maintenance scheduling and completion, new equipment in, old equipment out was all subjected to this methodology, except for one aspect, and I'll explain that in just a few minutes, our parts room. For some reason, we never really applied those principles to our inventory. By June of 2010, our shop was recognized by Amy with its Best Practice Award for our quality system and process design. So it really took 3 years of changing the culture and learning how to do this kind of thing to get to where we are today. There was actually one day in March of 2010 that we noted that our shop had absolutely nothing to do. That means our repairs were caught up, our PMs were complete, all of our projects were complete, and we were waiting on the phone to ring. Now that didn't last very long because it was only a matter of time before the next call came in. But that kind of principle, that kind of thinking was applied to everything we do except for our parts inventory. The image on your right is our shop today. Now it doesn't always look like this. When volumes increase, the space fills up. We have mechanisms in place to try to get that volume back out of the shop. But whereas in the past, it would take us a couple of days to clean and organize and get things back where they needed to be, now with this new methodology, it only takes a few minutes So if I have a vendor coming in and needs some workspace, we can clear that floor space out fairly quickly, get everything back where it belongs in just a few minutes. Or if I, for instance, need to take a picture for a webinar, I have that luxury as well. It'll look like this for a while. It'll fill back up, but with single piece flow, everything back out. We have applied those principles, as I said, to many of our workflows, but we always seem to resist doing it with our parts inventory and our stock room. And that's because the struggle is real. It is a real struggle to count parts, to adjust for part number changes, pricing changes, and sometimes even vendor changes when we're dealing with a parts inventory. And I guess the thought of cleaning it out, organizing it, and counting it really filled us with a certain kind of sadness. It was maybe an angst that, well, what if we get rid of a bunch of stuff and I need that part tomorrow? Or maybe even despair. Those emotions were all kind of in there, that we're going to clean this up again, we're going to organize it again, but then just in a couple of weeks or maybe months, we're going to be right back where we started. And so one of the ideas of this kind of methodology is to continue to optimize your processes. So back in fall of 2018, we realized that one of the changes, one of the optimizations that we needed to make was to convert to a new computerized maintenance management system. When we did that, in exporting our parts inventory out of the old CMMS into our new one, we realized that we had some weaknesses in how we were managing our parts inventory. It was an open system, and that open system meant that all of our engineers, all 10 of them, had the ability and the access to add parts, to delete parts from the inventory, to change part numbers and prices, to select new vendors. That always didn't make it into the inventory accurately because it was an open system. We had the freedom to go in and type in part numbers and vendor names and pricing. And we found out that we had multiple entries for parts, several part numbers for the same part with different part numbers and prices. And we realized that that data was not good. It was not an accurate inventory at all. At the same time, we lost some of our space. We lost about 600 square feet of space to other priorities. There were clinical departments that needed that space, and as a result, we lost a staging area for new equipment that's coming in, old equipment that were being disposed of, and to have a space for vendors to set up shop if we had to have them come in to do some work for us. So it really brought my lack of management of that part of our process into full focus. And we decided in fall of 2018, at the same time we were converting to a new CMMS, to tackle that parts room again. We knew that we could not start making changes and actually measure whether those changes were good unless we knew where we were starting from. And so the first thing we did was we counted our inventory. When we were done, we estimated we had about $300,000 worth of parts inventory. That inventory was accumulated over many, many years. It included legitimate parts that we needed and used all the time. It included parts for equipment that was no longer even in the hospital because we didn't have a mechanism to purge those items from our stock. It included parts that we had robbed off of just retired equipment to support other older equipment that was not adequately logged into our inventory. But the bottom line was we had about $300,000 in our inventory, and our parts room was just chock full of things. We also realized that we were kind of straying from our method of single piece flow, of a constant workflow, and we were really operating in a stock mentality or a batch mentality, to use the vernacular. The stock mentality is we weren't buying what we needed for today. We were buying what we needed for today plus some additional spares because we didn't want to go through the process of parts ordering too many times. We had this thought that buying more at one time would reduce our shipping cost. We found out that that was not exactly true. We knew we had parts back there, but did we have any kind of quality measurement for those parts? Up until we completed this process of optimizing our inventory, our parts decisions were basically based on cost, mostly on cost, and sometimes on our favorite vendors. Whichever vendor we had a good relationship with, that's who we bought the part from. Our shipping costs were going up because we were asking for overnight delivery on things we couldn't find in our own parts room. Our shipping costs were going up because we were adding parts prices. Like if a part was less than the shipping, we would add parts to kind of make us feel better about ordering overnight. And probably the most significant finding as we were kind of looking at our system was our engineers were spending 20% of their time on average on clerical duties involved with ordering parts. That's 1.6 hours. And if you do the math on that, 10 engineers spending 1.6 hours a day ordering parts comes out to about 2 FTE a year. So we're using 2 full-time equivalents for the sole purpose of buying parts that we need to repair equipment. And I mentioned that we lost our equipment staging and vendor workspace. We also identified that as a need, something that we wanted to do. So I want to talk to you about our inventory cycle. This was our state back in fall of 2018. Our inventory cycle looked like this. When an engineer needed a part, he bought a part. But instead of buying the part that they needed and only the part that they needed, they would add a couple in there for spares. They'd put them on the parts shelf. The parts shelf would get overcrowded because I had 10 engineers doing this. We would lose the spares. We'd be frustrated because we couldn't find it, and we'd spend a lot of time searching for it. So what did we do? We ordered it again. But we didn't order just the one we needed. We ordered more spares to try to compensate for losing those spares. And if you repeat that cycle just a few times a year, it will load up any stock room that you have. It wastes time and money because you're spending today's money on parts that you won't need until next month or next week. And it causes frustration when you remember putting something on a shelf and updating the inventory, and you go back to it and you can't find it, and you have to reorder that part anyway. We needed a way to break that cycle. And so in order to break that cycle, we called all the engineers together, and we had some pretty intense discussions about if we could design a parts inventory system, what would that look like to you? And we wanted to stay away from all the things that we couldn't do. We wanted to dream about what a parts inventory system could be and how that could make their jobs easier, make us more efficient. And so we asked a lot of what-if questions. And so I'll go through those questions here right now. So our first question that we asked was, what if our parts inventory was largely kept off-site? And instead of talking about how that couldn't happen, we left that as one of our prime directives for this project was, what if we could find a way to keep most of our parts off-site but still get them when we needed them? What if ordering a part didn't require me to make several phone calls? What if I only had to call one person to get that part, no matter what that part was, or at least for a large majority of our inventory? What if we only kept those parts on site that were used for life support, mission critical, or they were high volume parts? We knew we were using several of them a week. One of the questions that came up came from one of my engineers, which proves that he's a genius. I've suspected it all along, but this proved it. He said, what if we found a source for depot repairs for this general biomedical equipment we're spending time on that was so quick to get the machine back to us and so cost effective that it didn't pay for us to work on the machines? That was a brilliant idea. We put that on the list as something that we wanted to improve on. We asked the question, what is the worst that can happen if the manager goes into the parts room, clears off a shelf, and throws away something that you need tomorrow, really think about what's the worst that can happen. Well, the answer to that was the worst that can happen is I have to reorder a part. What if we were free from the burden of acting as purchasing agents? What if we could regain some of that 1.6 hours a day that we're spending on the phone? So with those questions in mind, we set out to find a partner that could help us answer them, because we knew we couldn't do it all by ourselves. There would be no way, if I wanted to take care of moving our parts inventory off-site, that I would be able to set up a system where I'm renting a storage warehouse and having a mechanism to get parts ordered, parts counted, and back to our 2 main sites in our hospital system with any kind of reliability. So we knew we would need some help with that. So in the fall of 2018, while we were changing CMMSs, we started evaluating part sourcing vendors. There are several of them out there. We talked to a few of them. We even talked to some logistic companies that specialize in keeping inventories and getting them to businesses on an on-demand basis. The first thing that we had to do was stop the bad data going into our CMMS. We had to stop the duplicate entries. So we locked that down. And so now none of our engineers can add a part without it going through a quality assurance procedure, where we make sure that the part number is typed in correctly, that it is the correct part number, correct pricing, and the correct vendor. We also have a quality assurance piece where we make sure that it's not already in there under some other name. Now, when our engineer adds a part to a work order, they point and click instead of typing in a part number. That's more accurate. And now we could really start counting what we were buying, how often we were buying it, and who we were buying it from. So then we started asking those questions to our vendors, our prospective part sourcing vendors. Can you act as our warehouse and get us the part when we need it? Can you show us data to prove that you're able to do that? Can you provide one-stop shopping for us? Can we make one phone call for no matter what part we need on 90% of our parts orders and find the part for us and get it to us when we need it? Do you have quality measurements that we can look at that rates vendors on out-of-box failures, how often they send us the wrong part, or how often a part fails to meet its warranty? Can you give us quality data on how often we're ordering things overnight when we shouldn't? Ease of ordering was right at the top of the list. If I have to spend 1.6 hours a day ordering parts with you, it's not going to be worth our change to this new system. We would like to be able to contact you, have the request sent in, and have you guys shop for the parts. I don't want my engineers shopping for parts. If we've already ordered a part from you, it should take less than a minute for us to reorder that part if it's something that we use frequently. And we also want one of these vendors to be able to provide us some assurance that they could update part numbers, pricing, and vendors and supplier sources for us so that we could update our CMMS on a regular basis. Now, with the core intention of reducing the amount of time our engineers were spending on clerical work. So here's where we are today. ACH, or Arkansas Children's Hospital, selected PartSource Pro because they met all those components we required in a sourcing vendor. We now only keep about $20,000 in inventory. That's for mission-critical, life support, and high-use parts only. So in essence, PartSource Pro is our warehouse. We have data that shows that we are only buying what we need when we need it, so we're no longer spending today's money on tomorrow's parts. Our shipping costs have dropped because we're not duplicating orders. We get feedback from the PartSource Pro website that we can use for feedback to our engineers, both good and if there's improvements needed on how we're using it or on what parts we're ordering. and we can go into our website and download the parts that we've ordered for the last quarter or the last month, whatever time frame we want, and import that parts list into our CMMS parts module, and PartSource is now managing our part numbers and pricing changes. Now that we've got that kind of system in place, we can now do proactive part stocking, so we're really getting leading edge on that. So we can look at our approved capital equipment list, we can see what capital equipment that's going to be bought this year, and then we can start planning that at the end of the warranty of that capital equipment, here's some things that we might want to look at stocking to maintain that equipment. We recovered enough space through this process that we were able to add a small machine shop, a vendor workspace, and the duplications in parts locations and parts descriptions in our inventory has been reduced by quite a bit. And we get data back like this. So these are reports that the PartSource Pro program provides for us. The report on the left, the parts and repair spend, is something that we use to improve utilization. You can see we have 10 active users, and all 10 of those have used that website, that portal, in the last month. This is for the period of July 2019. We have 2 facilities enrolled in the program, and both facilities took advantage of the service. One item of note, that third bar, the 10 active modalities there on your left, PartSource Pro breaks down their parts into potential modalities. So they supply sourcing for parts for 29 modalities. At this point in time, we're buying parts within 10 of those modalities. So that's an opportunity for us to improve how we're utilizing the system. The pie chart at the bottom left tells us how often we're buying an OEM original part through PartSource, and what percentage of orders were going to the secondary market. One of the good things about checking on the secondary market part, whereas in the past we weren't really paying a whole lot of attention to quality, PartSource Pro shows us a ranking of those parts, and it gives a quality score, so we can be reasonably assured that when we get the part, it's going to be equivalent to the OEM, that it's not going to fail out of the box, or we're not going to have to return it because the supplier sent us the wrong part. The report on the right is a quality management report, and this is some of the feedback that I use with my engineers. You see the customer return rate and a benchmark for customer return rate. So what that means is the benchmark is 2%. That means 2% of our orders is the average or the benchmark. Customer return rate are those parts orders that we return the part to the supplier because we've ordered the wrong part, we misidentified the part. The way I use it is I use it as a measure of technician troubleshooting competence. So this, at 0%, I can be assured that my engineers are not buying 4 or 5 different parts in the hopes that one of them will fix the machine. It kind of gives us an indication that they're troubleshooting very well right down to the part that they need. They know how to identify the part, and we're getting the right part the first time. The second measurement, the supplier return rate, is a little bit higher than the benchmark for July, but the good thing is I can drill down on that 5.7% and see which suppliers were causing us the problem. Supplier return rate are for return parts where the supplier made the mistake. Is it out-of-box failure, or a part didn't last through its warranty, or they just sent us the wrong part because their part numbers were not where they needed to be. Okay, this next report, service level metrics. This is how we gauge how well PartSource Pro is keeping their promises to us. And I wanted to draw your attention to the response to a request. One of the things that PartSource Pro does for us is they do our shopping and our parts research for us. If we have a device that we need a part that's hard to locate, we can't locate it, or we don't see it in their catalog, from the website, we put in a request to PartSource Pro. They promise us that they will get back to us with an answer within 60 minutes. And for the month of July, our engineers were getting an answer on whether a part was available within 7 minutes. That 7 minutes, my engineers are off doing something else and waiting on PartSource Pro to perform that function for them. And so we're saving that research time that we would normally spend on finding a part. Here's some more service level metrics, utilization. I won't go over this in detail, but this tells me how well my engineers are using the system. They still have the ability, if they so choose, to order parts directly from a supplier, but we discourage that. If PartSource Pro can do the shopping and place the parts order for us, that's what we want to do. Shipping and batch ordering. This is one of our favorite reports because this gives us an idea of how many of our parts orders are being ordered overnight. So shipped to Biomed overnight, that top number, the industry average for biomed techs ordering parts is 24% of their parts are being shipped overnight. And these are parts that are low priority, general biomedical type of parts. We don't know why biomeds do that. But here I have a measurement that shows that we have one of the lowest rates in the country, according to PartSource. And of all the orders we placed in July, only 5 of those orders were ordered overnight. So I can drill down into those 5 orders, find out who ordered it, find out what it was for. Our work order numbers are linked to the parts order in that report, and we can tell was this a legitimate order or not. And in this case, they were all legitimate orders. We can also see if our biomeds are reverting back to batch mentality and buying more than they need. And that's a measure of, are we spending today's money on tomorrow's parts? So in summary, here's what we gained. Oh, I forgot to talk about one thing, the depot repair services. I also forgot to mention that if you remember our list of criteria on what we wanted our vendors to provide for us, money was not even in the top 10 of the questions that we were asking. And we felt that even if we broke even, if we didn't save a dime, we would come out ahead in the time savings and the efficiency of our system. And so now with PartSource Pro, we use depot repairs services that they provide. They do the shopping for us on those depot repairs. And those depot repairs have been so fast and cost effective that we don't stock parts on these particular devices anymore. We don't even work on the machines. We do a cursory checkout when they come down for repair to make sure they're really broken. And then within just a few minutes, we can be on the PartSource Pro website, order a depot repair, and before we can even get the machine in the box, we have a shipping label and an RMA to attach to it. And it goes straight to the receiving dock where we send it out to the vendor that PartSource Pro has listed for us. We control our inventory now. We know what we have and what we don't have, and we know where we can get it if we need it. We gained space that we had lost. Now we know what we have on site, and we have a place for vendors to work. We have a place to unbox new equipment or to stage outgoing equipment. And we have low overnight shipping costs without sacrificing turnaround time. So those are the kinds of benefits that the PartSource program has provided for us. It has really improved our processes and optimizing the way we're doing our parts inventory management. So here's how the PartSource program works. We pay a monthly subscription fee. And in return, we get PartSource guaranteed pricing. And so they do the shopping for us. A recurring parts order takes less than a minute to complete. And for hard-to-find parts, we make the request, and PartSource Pro does the research. Within 5 months of starting this program, we saved enough real dollars. I'm not talking soft dollars here. I'm talking about dollars that I had budgeted for parts that I didn't have to spend. In the first 5 months, we saved enough money on our parts purchases that it paid for the subscription. I don't know if that would be typical for other systems or hospitals, but for us, within 5 months, we paid for the service, and that's a pretty remarkable return on investment. By the end of the first year, we paid not only for that annual fee, but we netted an additional $134,000 savings. And again, that's not soft money, that's real money that was in our budget that we did not have to spend. So with that, I think that finishes up, and I'm ready to take any questions. Thanks for listening to me today.
Boyd, thank you so much for articulating what you've been doing to lean out your department, in particular for the parts. If you have any questions, please go ahead and hit your control panel, and there's a Q&A section. You can type in your question, and we do, Boyd, have a few questions for you that have come in as you've been speaking.
Okay.
So the first question we have is, are the quarterly imports and stock parts inventory management included in your PartSource Pro program? Or is it an extra fee?
No, it's included in the program with that subscription fee that we pay every month. I have access to all that data. It's like our account rep with PartSource Pro says, it's your data. We just keep it for you, and so I can do that daily if I want to, and it's included in the subscription.
Okay. Thank you. Another question, sounds like you've been at this for a year. Are there any key learnings or things that you would have done differently to change your the inventory process?
Probably the only thing that I would change is start this earlier, like maybe 12 years ago, when we started looking at our processes with this new methodology. I kept my promise, by the way. I didn't use the L word ever again in the whole presentation. I just wanted to mention that. But we would have started this a lot earlier. The problem with change is you really have to have a culture of change. And my engineers are great. They know that I like to tinker with the way the things work, and I make a change. They know it's not permanent unless it works. And if it works, it takes a little, it's a little easier for them to accept. And so I would say start early, and once you start, be consistent with it, and find reliable processes that don't require a lot of management to maintain. And then, sometimes you may have to go slowly. I know biomeds, I've been around them for 30 years. Sometimes they like to have their little cubby hole of stuff that they keep. It helps them feel safe, like they're prepared. Sometimes that's a challenge as well. So I would start early. Once you start, be consistent and allow your engineers to grow and learn and see the benefits of it. You really can't force feed it to them. They have to see the benefits of it.
Thank you. Okay, another question. You mentioned that you are saving 2 FTEs a year based on this process. How did you measure that to get to the 1.6 hours a day of time spent sourcing?
Well, we did it 2 ways. We actually did time studies. That's probably not the most accurate way because we weren't watching all the time. But over a period of days or weeks, we would just observe how often we were on the phone ordering parts. And so in our shop, all of our engineers are located in one shop. We can see all of them from all directions. And so we can tell when they're on the phone ordering parts. We can also hear if they're on the phone ordering parts or if they're talking to their wife about whatever grocery list they have to get on the way home. So we kind of looked at that, saw that on average, that we were around 2 hours, 1.6 hours a day. There's also some time studies as well that you can find on the internet that shows that in the service support industries, that's pretty typical. But I would encourage you to do your own time studies to see what your system is providing for you.
Great, thank you. Related to continuous improvement, as you add more devices to your roster, what is your process? Who is responsible?
Okay, we have someone named Sheila who is our control tech, and it's her job to make sure that our shop looks the way it did in that picture that I showed you. And one of her assignments is to make sure that any kind of parts that are added to the inventory pass a few tests. First of all, they have to be for life support or mission critical devices. And we have those devices annotated as such in our CMMS. Or we have to be able to look back at our order history through PartSource Pro and demonstrate that we use a certain amount per month. And I forget what that number is. She handles all that for us. And then we have a discussion with the engineer to make sure this is something that we need. It's not just we're storing up for a later day. And then Sheila's in charge of making sure that that part number is entered correctly into our CMMS. For new equipment that we get in, we have to do, we're doing evaluations on it based on risk or based on how we're going to support it, whether we put it in an AEM, or an alternative equipment maintenance program, or we're doing it according to manufacturer specs. And so we can take a look at that and kind of gauge, you know, if this is a ventilator that requires filter changes, how many filter changes do we expect to do in a month or in a year? Is there a shelf life on those filters? And then we can kind of decide whether or not we want to stock that. So with the ventilator, it passes the first test, it's life support. Secondly, we have to do PMs on it. We're going to do it according to manufacturer specs, and so we know how many we're going to need per year. And if those two things are met, then we can add it to our parts inventory. At this time, we haven't run into a situation where we don't have room, because we've just kind of cleared our shelves and reduced our inventory over the last few months. So that's probably one of the things that we're going to run into eventually is if we identify enough parts to stock, we may have to change those parameters, or we may have to try to figure out a different way to store the parts.
Great. So we do have a question. What CMMS are you using?
Okay, I can tell you what we're using. I probably shouldn't tell you which one we moved away from. We are using eMate, which is a Fluke product. One of the things that eMate provides for us is the ability to wirelessly network to our test equipment. There again is a process improvement thing that we kind of have out in the future that we want to do to kind of reduce the typos in test data, and probably more importantly, having our engineers sit at a desk typing in data when we can be transmitting that to the CMMS. eMate also is kind of an open design system that we could close down certain areas, like when we close down our parts list. It comes to you pretty much unconfigured, and you can build it the way that you want. And it's been a good decision for us at this point.
Great. Okay, Boyd, we have two questions, but they're similar, so I'll ask both of them simultaneously. How did you convince upper management to agree to the PartSource fee? And then what has the response been from senior management on the cost savings?
Surprisingly, it wasn't very difficult to convince them that we wanted to try this. We had enough data, I think, in the process improvement aspect of it that I think that was enough to convince them. When it came to money, we kind of demonstrated that it was low risk for us, that we can go into this with a renewing annual agreement with PartSource Pro, and if any time they didn't provide what we needed, or we weren't saving enough money to make it worth it, that we would move on to something else. And so they trusted us enough to give that a shot. And really, it only took 5 months for us to show them that it was a good decision, and it's just, there's been no question since then.
Great. Another question, the emotional aspect of letting it go, how did you get your biomeds to do that and let go of inventory?
Okay. Well, it wasn't always easy. I'll just say that. Sometimes we took the gentle approach, and sometimes they helped with it, and we had a reasoned discussion, and we would go through every shelf on there and ask them what this was. If they didn't know what it was and it wasn't marked, it went into a discard bin. Those were the kind of easy discussions that we had, because if nobody knew what it was, how do we know that we need it? There were also some discussions where the engineer said, oh yeah, we don't have that machine anymore, we don't need those parts, let's get rid of those. Some of the more difficult discussions centered around, oh, don't throw that away, I used one of these last year and I might need another one. And so we kind of had to draw a line in the sand and say, look, if you haven't used it in a year, we're going to get rid of it. And that's when we asked the question, what's the worst thing that can happen if I discard this part that you haven't used in a year? And the answer was always, well, I just order another part. And I said, well, you let me worry about the budget, and you worry about ordering the part if you need it. And that kind of helped them get over that hump. Now, we haven't completely sterilized the whole process. Our engineers, even though we have workspace standards on what they're supposed to look like, which helps keeps our shop clean, they still have enough cubby holes to keep non-stock items if they just have to have it. But when it comes to those items that we want to control, then yeah, we had several discussions, and it took several years before we were comfortable with what we were doing. I think one of the big motivating factors that they saw was they saw that there might be a benefit to it because of all those emotions that we went through every time we had to take a Friday and clean out the parts room again. I think they got tired of doing that, and they saw that trying something different, it could possibly work. And if it works, that's great.
Okay. Another question. Do you know if any Veterans Medical Centers have or use PartSource Pro?
Sarah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if any VAs have or not.
Okay. Yeah, we do have VAs using the program, and we will follow up offline to give some more information about that question. Okay. And then another question, how did you reduce your inventory from 300,000 to 20,000?
We got rid of a bunch of stuff, and we did it responsibly. If it was just an outdated part, or we didn't know what it was, or if it looked like it was damaged or dirty, we recycled it. We sent it to a recycler. If it looked like it was a part that maybe could be used, we put shelves of our parts room out to bid with used equipment buyers who are buying, equipment that hospitals are retiring, trying to refurbish them and sell them on a secondary market. We placed just shelf loads of parts that we've pulled aside for disposal and asked them to bid on it. A lot of them were sold, and then some of them were actually given to charities that maintain medical equipment for overseas charities. It took the better part of the year to get rid of most of the stuff.
Great. So, Boyd, thank you. We've gotten through all of the questions that were submitted. Really interesting how quickly and efficiently you've been able to solve this process that seems to be a big challenge for lots of hospitals across the country. So thank you for sharing your insight with us today.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
We do have one more question that just popped in. Hold on one second. So we have a few more minutes. Does PartSource have a list of equipment types that can be brokered for depot service?
Yes, they do. I would suggest getting a demo of the PartSource Pro website because they will show you a live website and ask them to let you drive. That's one of the things that sold our engineers on it, is it was okay to have the PartSource Pro expert show us how to order, how quick it was to order it. They were really great at letting our engineers try it out during the demo. And you can go in and search for certain, devices that you were looking for depot services. It's all right there in their catalog. If it's not in the catalog, you put in a request, and according to our reports in July, within 7 minutes, PartSource Pro is telling us whether or not there is a source for that, and if there is, how much it'll cost, and they get it set up in the catalog, and then you move on. So yeah, they do have a list. It's in their catalog.
Perfect. Great. Well, again, Boyd, thank you so much for your insight today, and thank you everybody on the phone who has joined us. As a reminder, we do have another webinar coming up October 3rd at 1 o'clock, where Gary Barkov from Advocate Aurora will provide insight on the challenges and how they faced them at Advocate Aurora when they brought two health systems together, and what the implications were for the clinical engineering department there. So please go to partsource.com under the news and events section, and you can register right now for the October 3rd event. And again, Boyd, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for joining today on this webinar. This will conclude our webinar, and we'll hope to see you next time.